So thank you so much to everyone joining us, and thank you so much to our panelists. The College of Legal Practice is really passionate about access to the solicitor's profession. We are learning as we go, and this is one event where we're loving learning and listening to people who've got particular experiences around accessing their profession and working in the legal sector. So this event is very much for anyone who is interested in hearing more about neurodiversity and hearing from three junior legal professionals who have joined us today. We're very privileged to hear from them and them to be sharing their lived experiences of autism and ADHD. So thank you so much for joining us. So I'm just going to allow some introductions, if that's okay, from everybody. So Ibrahim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. So my name is Ibrahim Mohammed. I go by Ibsmo online. About myself, I did my undergraduate in psychology at Cambridge. I focused on psychology of education. I did my master's at Oxford looking at higher education and legislation. I then was able to get a training contract for a London law firm, and I've just kind of finished the LPC LLM. And in terms of legal experience, before I applied for a training contract, I made sure that I got some experience abroad. I went to Pakistan for 3 months. I went to Malaysia for a month, Singapore for another 2 weeks, realizing that law around the world is very interesting, and then decided to come back to the UK. I got my diagnosis of ADHD quite late. I got it at age 26, so very recently, and I got it at the kind of last week of law school. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Phil?
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Phil Stevenson. I'm an experienced paralegal. I'm a trainee legal executive. I'm a writer and a content creator, and I'm a young neuroinclusion consultant. I did my undergrad at Nottingham Trent. I did my LPC at De Montfort. I've worked at a range of different workplaces over the course of my career. Call centre for a national charity, a training course provider, local government, a telecoms operator, a couple of stints in private practice, and most recently at an environmental non-profit based in London. So yeah, I've been working in the legal profession since January 2018. I got my diagnosis of autism when I was quite young, about 7 or 8 years old. Staff at my nursery school described me as highly intelligent but difficult to handle, which sounds about right for me. Yeah, I've got experience in a range of different practice areas, and I am around 1 year away from qualification as a chartered legal executive.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Phil. And Connie, are you able to hear me at the moment? Connie's joining us on the phone.
Yeah, I can still hear you. Yep.
Would you like to introduce yourself,
you hear me?
Connie? Yes.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Connie. I'm a trainee solicitor at Pinsent Masons, due to qualify this September. I'm based in the Leeds office. I studied law at Durham University, graduated in 2019. And I had a year in between graduating from Durham and starting the LPC at the University of Law. So I did a year of paralegaling at Clifford Chance's Newcastle Hub office, which was a really good experience. I'm currently in my 3rd seat of my training contract, which is property litigation. Before that, I was in intellectual property, and before that, I was in corporate. And I'm due to move into employment for my final seat. I was diagnosed with autism late last year at the age of 24, so it was a late diagnosis. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here and really happy to chat about neurodiversity.
Thank you so much. And Laura?
Hi everyone, so I'm Laura. I'm here on behalf of the academic team at the College of Legal Practice. So I'm one of the module leaders. I've been in legal education now for just over 6 years, and prior to that was in practice as a solicitor specialising in professional regulation. So as I say, I'm very much here on behalf of the academic team, answering any questions that are relevant to us, but also because I have an interest in the way in which people learn, how we teach, and making sure that we're making all of our courses as accessible as we can.
Thank you. So we're going to run through just a number of questions and ask the panel to share their experiences. As I said, people have submitted questions before, which is great. We're going to look a little bit at legal education, and people's experience of training, and then move on to the workplace. And then also just finish off with a reflection for anyone who's working as an employer, and then also hopefully some supportive guidance for those students or prospective solicitors who perhaps are neurodiverse, and also allies of people who are neurodiverse. So let's start with just understanding a little bit more about neurodiversity, in particular ADHD and autism. For those who are unfamiliar with, I say the definition, I think I should say definitions, because I think they involve and they are interpreted in different ways. I perhaps wonder whether you may feel able to share how you might describe autism or ADHD and your perspective, and how possibly it affects you in any particular ways. Phil, could you take that one first?
Yeah, so to me, autism is a hardwired neurological difference, divergence. It kind of feels a bit like using a different internet browser to the rest of the world. Say the rest of the world is using, let's say, Google Chrome, and I find myself using Firefox, for instance. It affects the way that I process and interpret information around me, and how I respond to, interact, and process and go through the world around me. I find it to be equal parts difficult but beautiful at the same time. I feel like when I'm able to find my sweet spot and motor, if you will, I don't really feel disabled by it, even though I do recognize that it does meet the criteria of disability in the Equality Act. More often than not, I don't find that I'm disabled by my brain, but I'm more disabled by things around me and in the world around me. There are sensory sensitivities that come from it, from auditory and visual stimuli and information. It can be overwhelming at times. I generally feel like I'm okay in this regard. I don't feel like my needs are particularly high, but every autistic person will present differently to me. And each of our profiles and experiences are totally valid. And as far as neurodiversity as a movement goes, because it was conceptualized as a human rights movement by Judy Singer, it has taken a lot of inspiration from the autistic pride movement, where the focus has shifted from the medical or the deficit model and the idea of blaming factors as being like the cause of autism, if you will, to a more identity-based social model where all forms of neurocognitive development are equally valid, and the cognitive diversity is just as important to the human race as biodiversity is to the animal and plant kingdoms.
Thank you. That's really helpful to hear. Connie, would you like to add to that from your perspective?
I mean, I haven't got too much to add because that was an incredibly comprehensive response from Phil, but I think I like to think I do have something to add as a woman diagnosed with autism, because I think there's definitely kind of an increasing awareness that historically it was always men who were diagnosed more than women. And originally the scientific research around that was because they thought that it had just occurred more in men. But I think there's an increasing awareness that that's actually not the case. And it's more how women are socialized from an early age to kind of hide traits or kind of suppress autistic traits. So they kind of fly under the radar, and women are kind of better at masking these traits because, women are socialized to be the more emotional sex, more sensitive. And I think that's part of the reason why women tend to be diagnosed less than men, even though it could be that, and it probably is, that there are probably just as many autistic women as there are men out there. And I think that's definitely part of the reason perhaps why I was diagnosed so late. I think it was being a woman and feeling like I had to hide my true self, particularly throughout school and university. And, that really contributed to kind of mental health difficulties as an adolescent, kind of thinking that I was broken because, I didn't feel like I was acting in a way that was expected of me as a woman. So I think receiving that diagnosis, even if it was late, just last year, it really helped me realize that, I'm not broken. And as Phil said, it's not so much the autism that disables us, but the people and the institutions and the arrangements around us. So I think that's what I'd have to add on that.
Yeah, that's really valuable. Thank you for sharing that, Connie. So Ibrahim, in terms of your perceptions, your views around ADHD, what would you like to share around that?
Perception and view. So, okay, I'll give you the definition that I've been working with. I feel this definition was so good. This is why he's a consultant. But my definition is very textbook. And I think it also lies with the fact that even I am so new to my diagnosis. So in terms of a lived experience, so the definition that like I use is very textbook because that's the one I think I can relate to the most. So the idea that ADHD is a chronic neurodevelopmental disorder, right? So it affects things like brain structure, brain activity. There's been enough studies to say that someone who has ADHD is the way their brain works is very different to those who are neurotypical, those who do not have ADHD. For brain development, for example, it could be sizes and structure. There's again more studies that say those who have ADHD maybe have smaller brains than those who do not. And in activity, it comes down to dopamine, norepinephrine, those two key neurotransmitters that are in imbalance. Maybe there's too much, maybe there's too little. And so the way in which those two neurotransmitters talk to each other in the brain, it doesn't really stimulate, or maybe it stimulates too much this part, the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe, if you guys remember, like from GCSE, because this is what I remember, GCSE psychology is the whole idea that things like executive functioning. So in short, those who have ADHD are maybe performing executive functions very differently. Maybe it's too much, maybe it's too little. And executive functions can look like working memory, impulse control. It can be impulsivity as well. So in terms of perception, people think that ADHD is you're very loud, right? It's seen as sometimes in like the kind of colloquial way we say it is like kind of this white boy syndrome where every young white person it's this very loud activity that is associated to ADHD. Oh, you have ADHD, you're therefore going to be loud. And then for those who, for example, aren't so impulsive, because ADHD isn't just about impulsivity, you can also be diagnosed if, for example, you have inattentive symptoms, then they realize that, oh, ADHD is a lot more than what we think it is. But I would say the discourse now is that it is essentially a brain developmental disorder that affects structure and activity.
Thank you. And is it true in terms of diagnosis as an adult that that's a relatively new development?
That's a good question. I think the current discourse, a lot of things that you would read is that those who have been diagnosed with ADHD quite young, as they grow older, their symptoms would, I guess, kind of minimize. But what we're seeing now, and I think the pandemic really highlighted this, is that adults who have ADHD or adults who had undiagnosed ADHD, the way that they would mask their symptoms in the pandemic, they kind of was able to see it more. So I think we are seeing an increase of adults who are being diagnosed with ADHD. But essentially, I guess it's those whose symptoms didn't really diminish and it's been apparent throughout.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful to hear from all of you about how you see your particular area of neurodiversity kind of come through and translate, because I think it does sound like it's very much different for everyone. And as we get towards the end, there are various other examples of people that you might want to listen to and hear about, because again, their stories I think may be different too. So I think it's important we don't just look at those official definitions. They seem to be evolving all the time. Thank you. So we do have a couple of questions here that people have asked about on this. One is, what is it like to adapt as being a late diagnosis of ADHD or autism? So, Connie, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I think for me, it's about maybe identifying the strengths that neurodiversity brings to me. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, my diagnosis, it was a really positive thing for me. It provided clarity, knowledge, understanding, and ultimately freedom to finally be who I really am. And you know, I'm very lucky that the strengths that autism brings me, such as, you know, attention to detail, following very kind of literal instructions, routines, consistency, and being very direct in my communication style, things like that, they're all really useful for a career in being a solicitor. And, you know, the challenges that autism presents, they fall kind of more disproportionately in my personal life, really, which is what led me to get the diagnosis. So I think, yeah, it's just about kind of focusing on the positives. And even though I do say that most of the difficulties in my personal life, I do try and focus on the positives there as well. You know, I'm very, very organised. my fiance will attest to that. Basically, me managing all the wedding planning and things like that. So I think, yeah, that would be the takeaway from that. I think the key to adapting is working out how it helps you rather than hinders you.
Thank you. Ibrahim, obviously that's very recent for you in terms of diagnosis. So as you say, you're still must be processing a lot there. Do you have anything to add for this this question? What's it like to adapt as being a late diagnosis?
Yeah, so similar to Connie, I do feel that the diagnosis gave me clarity. I feel like it also gave everyone in my family or my friends clarity, and now it even gave them the feeling that maybe they have ADHD. But it gave me clarity, and I think that was the benefit of it. I definitely went through a very negative spiral because I started to think, oh wow, had I been diagnosed earlier, I could have been the queen of the world by now. But unfortunately, because your ADHD can sometimes hinder you. But I got over that stage. And I think now, like as Connie said, I'm just trying to figure out, trying to adapt to it. I think the more I read and the more literature I consume on it and the more case studies that I hear, I can start to figure out and experiment with, well, what ADHD coping strategies can work with myself. And so my employer now, I'm able to tell them, okay, I want to try this, I want to try that. And I'm realizing like, oh, wow, like an open office definitely does work for me. Having dual monitors does work for me. Having flexibility in this scenario works for me. So I'm at that stage where I'm adapting as I read and as I learn.
Yeah, thank you. Another question. So Phil, perhaps you could help with this one. So someone's asked, how do you overcome the barrier of lack of clarity being neurodivergent?
This is a big one, isn't it? Because I know I don't do very well when things aren't particularly clear, like instructions at work. I don't know if that anybody else who is autistic or otherwise other neurodivergent has noticed this either. Like, you're given some information and you process it and you feel great, I've got it. Like no confusion, no other way that you think it could be interpreted, and you're onto a winner. But then it turns out that what the person said was quite different from what they meant, and you're told that you should have asked them to explain it, but until that point you thought you did understand it, you thought you did understand what they meant. Like there was no confusion, nothing like that, and it's only now that they brought it up that you realize you've processed it incorrectly. That happens with me. It's like you understand what they say but not what they mean, or like you can't know what you don't know, if you know what I mean. When it comes to work and like being given instructions by my supervisor or my manager, I found that repeating it back to them in a way that I feel I've understood and processed it can help. I mean, it certainly helps if you and your supervisor, if you're doing that, are on the same page. Can't always rely on that, but if you are, then that's an extra bonus. But for me, certainly having instructions and information written down so I can read it again if I need to, process it better that way, make sure there are feedback loops in there so that like if I can ask questions in case there is something that isn't particularly clear. And I feel like good employers will be responsive to questions that you have, because they'll understand that we all need clarity before doing something, so that we have an idea of what we need to achieve, and so that we don't like veer off onto a tangent.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think we've all had managers who haven't quite thought it through as they're describing it to us, I think. So I think that's a helpful example. Thank you, Phil. Actually, we have had a question through, and I think I can bring that into the next part of this. So we're just going to look a little bit at legal education. You've all obviously done incredibly well through your education journey, I'm sure, not without challenges. So the SQE, obviously is something that the college are focused on. The statistics we have around people who've taken the SQE only break it down as far as whether you consider yourself to be disabled or not. And 41% of people who declared that they were passed SQE1 last time around, compared to an average of 56%. So there was obviously something going on there. Now, we're really hoping that there's a report from the University of Exeter that will give much more detail around all these different types of statistics for lots of different groups, and also any intersectionality between different types of either demographics or ethnic groups or particular barriers. So that's what we have in terms of the SQE at the moment. But just going to your own experiences on the panel, firstly, just how was your experience in relation, obviously, to your neurodiversity when you were studying either for the LPC or for your qualification training. Ibrahim.
Can I make a quick point just on that?
Please.
Which is that, so this is an exclusive. When I had my diagnosis with my psychiatrist, I made sure that I never said I went to Oxford or Cambridge. This is the first time in my life that I have not said I went to Oxford and Cambridge. And it's because I read a study, and I read a lot of case studies from those in Singapore, that when they mentioned that they were seen as academic, or they mentioned what universities they went to, sometimes they're not seen as being neurodivergent, because how could you have ADHD? You clearly know how to read and write. You're clearly smart. You went to Oxford and Cambridge. So that was one thing that I just thought was interesting to note, which was I was very careful. I still said I went to law school, but I didn't say where. In terms of the LPC, I loved it and I absolutely hated it. I loved it because for me to thrive with ADHD, I need, unfortunately, stress, and I need the kind of anxiety that's involved with it, because that will counteract the symptoms of being inattentive, of kind of procrastinating, and not being able to focus. The stress of like, oh my God, if I get like if I get like a below a 60, they're going to revoke my training contract. That stress involved definitely got me out of bed every single day for the 6-month accelerated LPC, and like I worked. The negative of that was there were so many moments where I literally just couldn't focus and I fell behind, and I knew how important it was to me. I just struggled with literally just doing the task. And a lot of ADHD people will tell you that we know exactly what we need to do. Evidently, we're smart. It's just sometimes we struggle getting up. So for example, if I had assignments that were like, there was a 24-hour exam window, I would leave it to like the last 2 hours. I would get it done, I would pass, and then I would feel like, okay, that's fine. As opposed to trying to adjust for the next situation. The thing that honestly helped me the most were things that I was doing throughout my whole entire education that I didn't realize. And the number one thing I would recommend is just body doubling in the library. So I'm never as productive as I would be unless I'm in a library and I'm with someone. And if, for example, a library is too quiet, then I got the Pret subscription on half price, and I went to Pret. I got 5 coffees a day, and I would, not even coffee, I would get teas. I would sit there throughout the day. I would enjoy the stimulation of the coffee environment, and I would study with someone. So that is literally what got me through my whole entire education, was body doubling.
That's really interesting. And actually, I think some of our students, Laura, don't they, when they're the one-to-one as well, the need of having that support from people. That's interesting that you find that helpful, because again, I think some of these things are things where you're like, actually, I can see as a neurotypical person why that would be beneficial. In terms of your experiences, Connie, did you have any reflections for me on your legal education journey?
I think I'm kind of looking at it in hindsight, because I got my diagnosis after I'd graduated from both Durham and ULaw. But I would say about Durham, I really thrived in an academic environment, I would say, because the good thing about university is you have a lot of freedom to like make your own routines and see what works for you, and then enforce that in your own life. And you know, I was being autistic, I'm a very routine driven person, so it was really easy for me to like get into a flow of studying at set times every day and being really organized and things like that. It was more the social side of university that I really, really struggled with. And particularly in first year, because we had to share a room in the college that I was staying at. And that was obviously really, really difficult because I really like having my own space and routines. And when someone else is literally sleeping in the same room as you, it's really hard to keep those up. And, you know, I remember thinking at the time, everyone else manages to you know, sleep in the same room as someone else, why can't I? And again, it's that kind of feeling that, you know, there was something wrong with me when really there wasn't anything wrong with me at all. And when it came to the LPC, I did it during lockdown, so it was all remote. And again, that was fine from a routine perspective, because, you know, I could have my own routine at home with studying and attending the virtual classes. But I think, again, the problem with the LPC is that it's a lot of content. I think anyone who's done the LPC will agree with me. There's a lot of content to cram into a year or 6 months or however long you're doing it for. And I'm one of those people that likes to kind of take a deep dive into things and really take my time, you know, really getting into the detail of them, but I just feel like you couldn't really do that in the LPC because it's just so much content to absorb and learn and process in a really short space of time. And it really feels like you're kind of ticking boxes with the LPC as well, like ticking boxes for the purposes of being qualified, obviously, but it's just a shame, and I really wish that it could have been different, and maybe it will be different now with the SQE, given that the experience is now, I think it's 2 years of legal qualifying experience and a year an exam. But yeah, I really didn't enjoy the LPC at all for that reason.
Yeah, thank you. And there are differences, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how people feel going through the SQE. Before we move on to the SQE, there's been a question that's come through. Are there any tips on studying for a neurodivergent mind that you do or did yourself when at university or other exams? Phil, I'll just read that again for you to put you on the spot a little. Are there any tips on studying for a neurodivergent mind that you do or did yourself?
I can certainly relate to Connie's point about making my own structure there, because when I did LPC, I did it part-time over 2 years, so I was able to work at the same time. So that meant I was able to split my week, half work and half study. And it was up to me to be like really strict, if you will, to keep everything separate. So my study days, I would not do any work at all. And on my work days, I would give myself a break from study, really. It really is a case of finding out what works for you, really. And there is a trial and error element to it as well. So it's like, study like university, you've got a bit of a safety net there to try and like find out what works for you, make your own mistakes, see what sticks, see what doesn't, and then once you found what sticks, you're able to implement that for the rest of the time. I mean, for me, again, it was, you know, splitting my week between work and study, so I had those clear boundaries. I feel like I was also able to make use of my hyperfocus when I was studying as well. I think because I just found it really, really interesting, and I actually enjoyed my LPC experience as well. And because I'm quite interest focused and interest driven, I'm able to really, really dive deep and like put a lot of focus into what I'm doing when I can get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Whether there's anything from my experiences that you're able to take away from that, I don't know, and I guess that's for you to take away and have a think about. But certainly, as an autistic person, having that structure, having that routine, having that clarity, it definitely helped me. It helped me get my distinction at the time, which I was really proud of. Had I not done that for myself, it might have been a completely different story. But yeah, that's certainly worked for me. Yeah, but I can appreciate there is an element of trial and error that's involved for finding out what works for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. Laura, looking at the solicitors qualifying examinations, the SQE now, how does the college help those who are neurodiverse achieving their study?
I think there's a lot of things that we can do to help support students. And I think the really key thing for anybody is making us aware that you have particular needs, or that you like to study in a particular way, or that you need a specific type of support, because it's difficult for anybody you know, to give support if we don't know that there is a need for it. So I think that's probably the first thing that I would say, you know, do disclose if you've got autism, ADHD, dyslexia, whatever it might be, let us know. And that would be the same wherever you're studying. I think that's really important if you feel able to actually make that disclosure and be confident that you will be supported as a result. In terms of the support we can give, I think that will very much depend on, firstly, what you need, what's going to be helpful to you, and secondly, how you actually study. So I think just between the three of you that we've got here on the panel, there's different focuses, different things that are going to help. So Ibrahim's mentioned you like studying in sort of a more vibrant, noisy environment, you know, which might not be helpful for other people. They might find that quite distracting. So I think it's really important to be open about the support that will help you. Have that discussion with a personal tutor or a one-to-one supervisor, see what we can come up with. There will always be sort of general things that we can advise on. So if you find that you're studying and you get easily distracted by things sort of popping up, you can look at things like focus mode on your PC or laptop, so that you don't get distractions that are sort of coming up. You can think about how you manage your week, so thinking about actually sort of scheduling tasks in at certain times, so the sort of structure point that both Connie and Phil have mentioned there, so thinking about actually kind of helping you get that structure in place, allowing time for other things, so going out and socializing, sports, hobbies, whatever that might be. So there's lots of support from that sort of side of things, thinking about how you actually study best, and keeping that sort of one-to-one contact going, so you feel that you've got somebody that you can talk to. I think the other side of things is thinking about the assessments. So obviously there are assessments that are within the college or wherever you're studying, but if you're doing the SQE, you've also got external assessments with Kaplan. So it's important to be having those discussions so that if you need any reasonable adjustments, so things like additional time, maybe using a computer if you would otherwise have handwritten assessments, having a low occupancy room, for example, overlays on screens, those sorts of things. Really important to get those discussions in place early. So whether that's with your provider for an internal assessment, or whether it's with the SRA Kaplan for the external assessment, I think that's really key. So making sure that you can actually get those adjustments in place.
Yeah.
And I think just on that note, there's a lot of really helpful guidance on the SRA website. So if you do have any sort of condition, whether that's physical, mental health, any sort of neurodiversity, have a look on the SRA website, because there's lots of guidance there. It's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And our team are always happy to chat through that with anyone, regardless of whether you decide to prepare for the exams with us. I think, you know, we're learning as well, but we've got some experiences from students that actually so far have been quite positive in terms of asking for reasonable adjustments, not 100% positive, but some good examples at least to demonstrate that Kaplan are quite aware of that. Thank you. I'm going to move on now, because we had quite a lot of questions around application and interview processes for roles in the legal sector, which obviously are incredibly stressful and challenging, regardless of any additional barriers or challenges you might face. There are some statistics, obviously, that show people feeling like mentioning their disability also puts them at a disadvantage. So I think it'd be good to understand your perspectives and views on that. So how, actually, let me ask a more specific question here, because someone sent one in. So what are some of your struggles as a neurodiverse applicant, and how do you navigate them? Connie, do you want to take that one? What are some of your struggles as a neurodiverse applicant, and how do you navigate them?
I think for me, the biggest thing is like the uncertainty around applying for jobs and things like that. So because I'm qualifying later this year, like the qualification process is very soon. I think it's sort of end of March it kicks off. And obviously it's a massive thing, because that's when you become like a proper qualified solicitor. And, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty around that, because there might not be a job in the practice group or area that you want at your firm. So even if you want to stay at your firm, if they don't have a job in the area that you want, you'll have to start applying externally. And it's kind of just dealing with that uncertainty on top of like your day job as well, which is really hard sometimes. And I think the way I handle it is I kind of focus on what I can control right now. So what I can control, for example, is preparing responses to interview questions. Like, I really thrive in interviews because it's like a structured social interaction on something that I'm really interested in or passionate about. So I tend to do quite well in interviews. So kind of, yeah, preparing interview responses, and also speaking to more senior lawyers in like the areas that I'm interested in. Again, that's like a one-to-one interaction, so it's more manageable for me, and kind of asking, you know, expressing an interest the way it works at Pinsent Masons is obviously there needs to be a business case for any NQ job financially, but if they know that someone's interested in that area and wants to qualify into it, they do take that into account when creating NQ jobs. So I think it's just kind of, for me, someone who's autistic, I really, struggle with uncertainty, and I like to kind of create predictability and control where I can. And I think that can be extrapolated to other applications as well. So kind of preparing for interviews, preparing responses, reading up about the law firm or whichever company you're applying to. I did that when I was applying for training contracts in the first place. I really knew every firm inside out, which really helped me feel at ease as well. So for me, it's about sort of creating certainty and focusing on what I can control now rather than things that are out of my control.
Thank you. Ibrahim, you've obviously done a round of trainee applications, no doubt, relatively recently. What were your experiences?
I wish that was true. I actually only made 2, so I took a very lazy approach, which I don't recommend. What I would say is print off. I mean, this is where I feel like my ADHD is just maybe not the best in terms of pro-environmentalism, because I have a massive printer and I print off everything in terms of very important documents. And I even do it in work now, whether it's doing contracts or whether it's doing applications, because with ADHD, one of the reported symptoms is, for example, like maybe lack of attention. And if you are writing a document and you misspell something, or you forget to have a space in between 2 words, and so I always print off everything, and then I circle, I read again, circle if there's any mistakes. So printing off all applications, printing off any contracts you have to make, just printing really. And then in terms of actually applying, I think Connie gave like really, really amazing advice. When it comes to like ADHD specifically, I would say that I really shine when it comes to kind of interviews. So I would want to speak via Zoom or speak via just face-to-face interactions when I was networking. But I think that's where ADHD can benefit us is, networking we're great at. You can put us in a room and we can talk to everyone, maybe talk too much, but we're great in that regard. But that was it. I didn't really do too much regarding the ADHD stuff.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And Abraham, I can see that you're typing an answer because that's really helpful. Keep the questions coming. If there are any we don't have time to go through in this, I promise you that we will ask one of the panel to answer them at some point afterwards, if that's okay. But thank you for sharing some of your questions. I can see them coming through. Phil, in terms of your experiences, how have you found that?
I mean, Connie's hit a number of nails on the head right there. Control the controllables, create certainty. She's absolutely right. And that's what I try and do myself as well. My experiences with applications have been a bit of a mixed bag, really. The struggle that I have had most of all has been around interpreting intentions behind questions that are on like the longer application forms, like training contract applications, for instance. If something isn't clear to me, then it doesn't get processed properly, or it might get processed incorrectly. I might miss what they're trying to ask, and I don't get the question right, if you will, and I get filtered out at that stage. So like if it's language, intentions, what it's actually asking of me, I need that to be as clear as possible, really. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I haven't been all that successful when it comes to training contract applications. I remember only getting past the online application stage once in all the years that I've been all the years that I was trying them. I don't do them anymore because I don't need to. I'm qualifying via SILEX, so I don't actually need a training contract. But yeah, and I appreciate that at the application stage, you don't get any feedback because there are thousands and thousands who are at that stage as well. So yeah, I mean, I get it. I think what I found helps me is if I'm able to like have someone who I can bounce off and just ask, am I processing this right? Am I interpreting this right? Is this what it means? And the good thing is that with the connections that I have that are mostly online, thanks to a lot of work being put in during pandemic, they're usually only a DM away, or they're only a text message away. So I can just text to check, am I understanding this right? Is this what they're asking? Usually it takes a few minutes, but recognize that I can't do that all the time because, we've all got our priorities. We've all got, work as well. We all need to make a living, things like that. And I think another thing about focus as well, particularly if an application is long, I can sometimes have trouble sticking to a long application or following it through, especially if it is a long one. I've gone through super long paralegal applications, roughly akin to training contract applications, and I lose focus if there are like far too many questions in them. And yeah, the downside of that is that I can miss out on opportunities as well. So that's a difficult one for me. I'm still learning what works for me in terms of scheduling, in terms of putting some structure in place there. But yeah, those are some of my struggles when I've been making applications.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. There's a question here that's just come through about a neurodivergent person may not know what adjustments they need. I mean, they're not necessarily talking in the context of applications, but I guess everything that we've said about asking for adjustments, if you are aware of what you might be able to help you, is also valid for application processes and interview processes. Is that correct, Phil?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're always learning more about ourselves as we go through life, and what we know about ourselves now, we probably didn't know like 3, 4, 5 years ago. But because we've been on that learning journey, and because we've gone through life, we're able to understand ourselves a lot better and understand what we need in order to help us, really. So what I know now at 33 years old, I couldn't have known when I was starting LPC at 27 or my undergrad at 18. But I'm forgiving myself for that because, again, you don't know what you don't know, really. And, it takes time and it takes effort. And, there is the trial and error element that you need to go through in order to work out what works for you and what helps you. So if anybody else is in that position as well, where, looking back on things in hindsight, you didn't know what you needed, then that's perfectly okay. Don't forget to forgive yourself with that. You're human. You're as human as everybody else, and like every human, you learn, you grow, you evolve, and you become better over time.
Yeah, I guess this question that came through from a couple of people who registered is kind of moves on to that. And obviously, Ibrahim and Connie, is relatively late when you were diagnosed. But now, if you were to go forward for a job, I guess a couple of people have got questions in here about how do they divulge for appreciation of circumstance on application forms, and do they disclose their disability at early stages in application processes. And this person's wrote, when the EDI section is read by others, which from my naive perspective is not something that should be happening in EDI best practice. The equal opportunities form should very much be separately read, not by the hiring manager. But yeah, I don't know. Connie, do you want, in terms of how you feel about at what point you would declare that you are autistic across the application process, if you went for another job, how would you feel about that?
I think I would probably perhaps disclose it at interview stage if I got to that stage, because I feel like I'd have to disclose it at some point because it's on my LinkedIn. I'm a member of the ND Lawyer Project to do all these initiatives to do with neurodiversity. So I'd hope it's a positive. But, as some people have mentioned on this panel, that, there is kind of lingering sort of prejudice. And I know that I have read some statistics about it. And I know that you circulated the question document, and there was a story on it from, I think it was, I can't remember who it was exactly. It was a lady who was autistic, and she works with the government.
Was it the co-chair of the Law Society Disabled Lawyers Network? Connie? Yeah.
But yeah, I think because I know she mentioned that, previously in her career, she'd apply for jobs, private practice, and, she'd get to a certain stage. And then as soon as she disclosed to autism, she'd mysteriously not hear from them again. So, there is that kind of fear. And I have had, relatives telling me, you shouldn't disclose this. It could be a black mark against you. Unfortunately, in my current firm, that hasn't been the experience. Pinsent Masons have been very accommodating and accepting. And I recently published an article with Legal Cheek about my diagnosis, and I had a really, really positive reaction from colleagues on that. I was completely blown away. But yeah, I think from a disclosure point of view, it would probably be at interview stage. I think I would only disclose it if it became relevant in the conversation, I think. And again, going back to what I said previously, I think I try and kind of emphasize the strengths that it gives me rather than the way it poses challenges.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, Ibrahim, what response have you had to your diagnosis in the legal sector, and how have you found that through your process of applying?
Yeah, it's been so interesting. That question of should I disclose, I feel like is the golden question, right? So my absolute honest answer, my honest experience is that whenever I fill applications pre my diagnosis, I was more than happy to tick, yes, I'm a person of color. Yes, I come from a physical background. Yes, I went to a low comprehensive state school. All yes for that. Because to me, that shows objectively that despite being in the system where those social touchstones, they show resilience, right? Regardless of who I am, I've been through this, I've come up the other way, and this is who I am now. This is my application. It shows resilience. Does my ADHD diagnosis show resilience? To me, yes. But to an employer, I think there is a lot of debate. And I'm part of a few ADHD network groups, for example, on social media. That question came up. And my answer was like, yeah, you should be yourself. You should be authentic. You should be proud of who you are. And 500 comments were all like, no, do not disclose, wait until you've actually been given an offer. And it's because the discourse around ADHD, in my honest opinion, is not there yet. Yes, I think that it is for some law firms. Pinson Masons comes up so many times when I hear about neurodivergency acceptance. And I was on a panel recently with a partner from there, and they even said, yeah, we accept it and we'd be more willing to make adjustments. But I think that you have to just ask yourself, is it going to add to my application? And unfortunately, in private practice, at least that's where I'm headed, some of the discrepancies that, will select one candidate from the other, we will never know. And I think for me, I would only disclose it when I need to disclose it, when I need the adjustments to be made for me. And currently that's not at the application stage, nor is it at the interview stage. So I wouldn't disclose it. But if you are someone that needs those adjustments, then of course disclose it, because then you won't give yourself a fair fighting chance to get the job. But for me, I did not disclose mine. And in future, I still wouldn't until I get the job.
Yeah. No, I think that's an honest assessment, isn't it? And there are projects like the Neurodiverse Lawyer and Neurodiversity in Law and Neurodiversity in Business that are starting to just come through even in the last year or two, hopefully to generate that conversation and awareness. And hopefully today can do a little bit part of that as well. I know there are quite a lot of representatives on here from firms, which is fantastic. So hopefully they're listening and hearing kind of what you're saying. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the workplace. So we've got a question really talking about firms. Firstly, are firms ready to accommodate to neurodivergent people? Phil?
Firstly, like you say, I mean, there are so many groups and projects that are out there that are working hard to, improve the perception and, foster more, much more inclusion of neurodivergent people. And you're all credit to them. And I'm really happy to be friends with a number of people from those groups as well. So yeah, I mean, many neurodivergent people and advocates and allies who have been doing, really, really great work over the last couple of years or so to bring the neurodiversity movement and what it is and what it stands for to employers. Even though the legal profession has been a bit slow off the mark, really. But because of them and because of us, we've got more and more employers educating themselves, like Pinson's and like a few others that I've been able to talk to as well, like representatives, senior lawyers, everybody. More can always be done, but we've all got to start somewhere, haven't we? And appreciate that taking that first step is often the most difficult thing to do. But once you go in, then it's great. Absolutely, you can keep rolling. In terms of what we could do, I think the best thing that we as neurodivergents can do is just keep being our usual brilliant selves, because we are brilliant. There's so many strengths and abilities and mindsets that we have that are really, really beneficial to us, really beneficial to employers as well. So we're able to keep doing great work in the sphere that we're in, like particularly around neuro inclusion. Keep the conversation going, keep shouting about it, and be sure to invite as many people in as we can, because it's exhausting advocating for ourselves. So the more allies we can have and the more people that we can invite in to like spread the word, if you will, and keep that conversation going, fantastic. But yeah, the movement itself is, essentially a human rights movement, for, positive reevaluation and enhancing the recognition of us as neurodivergents. And the point of a human rights movement is, equity for all of us. And, we're the ones that are shouting for that equitable treatment and equality of opportunities, equality of support, and everything that, our peers, our neurotypical peers, don't necessarily need to shout for, if that makes sense. But at the same time, firms are businesses, and there's inevitably going to be the question, why is it such a good investment? But I guess you can think about it this way. Firms need clients coming in order to make money, right? And the more the more clients that come in, then the more that can be billed. But it's not enough to just be doing decent work. You've got to also be representative of the clients that you're serving. And with more and more people entering the business world, the business sphere, as people needing legal services, maybe business owners, and from diverse groups and communities based on, say, race, gender, religion, disability, and so much more. They're going to be looking for service providers who are representative of them and who do truly understand their position. And I feel like firms who are able to recruit more and more diverse applicants from this huge pool of staff, even better. Really, you're able to, you're able to be much more representative of the communities that you're serving, and more likely to retain clients, more likely to get repeat business.
Thank you. Has anyone faced any particular discrimination or any difficulties? I guess the legal sector is not known for its inclusion, although obviously things, as we say, are hopefully going in the right direction. Is there anything anyone would like to share in terms of something they found particularly difficult? Phil?
Oh, I could go on all day about this, but I realise it's 1:30, so I've got to be careful. Yes, I have, but it's not because of my divergence, but it's due to what I found is ignorance, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and often incorrect perceptions of what autism is, really. Some of the things that I've had said about me or to me or heard have been things like, he's special needs, he's untouchable. The fact that we have spent a lot of time and effort and money in accommodating you, basically, making me feel ashamed for my brain and for requesting adjustments that I need. Autism means you're a little, 4-letter word that I'm not going to say at 1:30 in the afternoon. I've been threatened with dismissal from one job because of being held to a standard that I just couldn't reach, because I was being compared to a neurotypical colleague who had been there for at least a year longer than me. In another job that actually happened, so I actually was dismissed for that very reason. I've had a recruiter say to me that I should remove references of disability and autism from my CV and my applications, because I think we were talking about this just a moment ago with Ibrahim. Employers will see it as a reason to not employ me. And actually, quite recently, I had a recruiter working at a company that I applied to, saying that they weren't going to put the reasonable adjustment in place for me to help me show my best self and remove obstacles that are in my way to show my best self, because, and I quote, it would put me at an unfair advantage compared to other candidates. It's always hurtful to hear comments like this, and it's always hurtful to experience these kinds of mindsets, really. And that there is why I do what I do in the neuro-inclusion sphere, and that's why I do what I do around the content I create and having these conversations, and pushing people as much as is appropriate to really have a think about how you're doing to include us as neurodivergent staff in your companies.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Phil. That sounds very difficult. Connie, have you had an example, I suppose I'm hoping, of what may have worked well for you in terms of facilitating adjustments and those difficult conversations within your workplace around your neurodiversity?
I mean, I'm quite lucky that I work at a a firm like Pinsent Masons, which is already quite progressive. So, you know, they're already really kind of open to the idea of hybrid working, you know, being at home a couple of days a week, being in the office, you know, 3 or 4 days, which really works for me, because I don't think I'd thrive very well completely remote, because, you know, I like the routine of going into the office. But obviously sometimes they can just get a bit much, especially if it's really busy. So it's nice to just have some time working from home as well. I can really like get my head down if I've got a lot to do and kind of hyper focus on those tasks. So that really works for me. Requesting special equipment wasn't an issue. I've asked for noise cancelling headphones because they weren't offered as standard, and you know, that was given to me without any hassle or anything like that. As for the difficult conversations, I think one thing I would really say, and I think is really important, I think from a kind of supervisory perspective, there needs to be more education on what the supervisors can do to signpost support for the person that's disclosing. Because when I disclosed it to my current supervisor, you know, he was very accepting, very tolerant and all the rest of it. But the problem was he didn't really know instantly where to kind of direct me to get support. He had to kind of go away and kind of look it up, and it took a while. And he did find out that there was like there is a Pinsent Masons Neurodiversity Network and Disability and Wellbeing group. But I just thought, you know, the fact that that wasn't common knowledge that he knew instantly, I feel like that kind of shows that there's a way to go to kind of educating supervisors on these issues. And he said himself that he wasn't really sure what to do initially, and I think that was really apparent in the fact that I disclosed to another one of my supervisors as well, and she didn't really know what to do instantly either. And I think that's the key thing, or one of the key things for me, is kind of educating supervisors on signposting support.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Ibrahim, I'd like to hear more from you on that. I've also got a specific question. I don't know if you know the answer to this one. As someone who has ADHD and an neurodiversity D&I champion, do we know if there's any IT for neurodivergence in the legal workplace?
I think Phil would be best to answer that question, actually, because I'm not a champion of neuro. I think Phil, but I can give a comment on the adjustments.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll start off with that, and then Phil, by all means. So regarding the adjustments, so that I'm having with my workplace now, so I think with me, like, I'm quite unapologetic about it. So I do go in the office and I say, like, oh, by the way, I have ADHD. Here's a resource. Or here is a website. Every week on the group chat, I'll send like resources, like, by the way, if you want to read this. So I kind of like slip it in just, you know, in very hints. And then the adjustments that I made, for example, asking for dual monitors because my brain processes information very fast. Sometimes I can be a bit disorganized. That's all been very welcomed. Noise cancelling headphones, again, that has been welcomed. But I think I also had to make adjustments. And I think that's one thing I like to point out is, yes, I have ADHD and the workplace needs to adjust for me, but likewise. And so, for example, if I know that I am more prone to getting distracted in a meeting and therefore going on my laptop or going on the internet, or if I'm more prone to disrupting someone when they're conversing with me in a meeting, I just, you know, again, the same way that I have to train myself to wake up at 7 a.m. to make the commute, I also have to train myself just to kind of be a bit more patient when I am listening. So I think I've also had to adjust myself to the workplace and vice versa. So I've been quite fine with my adjustments.
Thank you. Phil, so I mean, there's some IT that I'm aware of briefly in terms of read-write software and Grammarly and various dyslexia kind of support as well from an IT perspective. I don't know if you've got any perspective on that. I imagine the IT can vary quite considerably depending on how your neurodiversity presents itself.
That's yeah. Grammarly is something that I use quite often as well, because sometimes I might misspell a word when I'm like really focusing and just trying to get things out, and I have to read back and think, oh yeah, there's a red line, oh that's helpful. So yeah, Grammarly is definitely helping with that. In terms of software that might help, and like software apps, again, it does depend on how your divergence presents and your needs around this. But yeah, dictation software can be really helpful if you feel like you're able to process information by speaking it. There's text-to-speech software that can be installed onto your systems as well, where it speaks out to you something that say you're highlighting. Actually, funny story, I met a blind trainee a couple of years ago who uses that, and it was working really, really well for him. So much so that his colleagues wanted to try it out for themselves. They did, and it turns out they're motoring through their work. So yeah, now there's a classic example of what can work for someone who is disabled can work for so many others as well.
Yeah.
Some of the things I use as well are workflow apps like Trello. I think Workday is another one that I'm aware of as well. And if you're quite visual as well, if you get your information visually, then colorful calendars and visual calendars and diary management apps like things like maybe Motion, or there's one called ThroughDay, that they can help as well. But yeah, it's about checking in with how you're best able to process things, and then and seeing what's available and seeing what works for you. But I also would say don't discount access to work as well. The government scheme that's been set up for giving assistance for like certain measures like physical items, or in some cases an extra person to assist with things like note taking or diary management, or just to try and support you if one of your challenges is around, say, executive dysfunction. It's definitely worth a look at that. And from the best of my knowledge, from the best of my knowledge, it is free to find out more. It is free to get some features from them, get some assist from them as well. Your employer is able to make the application as well. So definitely have a look at them.
Thank you. That's helpful. So I think we've talked quite a lot about the experience within the workplace. I think I'd like to finish and draw it to a close now by asking all of you, I guess, any particular tips or guidance that you would most want to share with those on the call who are neurodiverse and are looking at and thinking about this legal career and progressing their legal career. So, Connie, what would you want to say to people who are on here who are finding it maybe challenging at the moment or looking forward to a career as a solicitor?
I think I would just reiterate what I've said earlier on in this call. I think focus on how it benefits you and the strengths that it gives you. And, kind of if you do want to talk about the challenges that it presents to you, maybe frame them in a way that shows you have like resilience and things like that. And I think for me, it's definitely focusing on areas of law that I'm passionate about that really helps. So I'm really passionate about intellectual property, artificial intelligence, tech law, things like that. That's one of my special interests. I could talk about that all day. So kind of focusing on that really helps make things a bit easier. And also get as much legal experience as you can. I think that's just a general tip to anyone. I think if you can get some paralegaling experience before you start a training contract, I think it's really helpful, because it as an autistic person, I really kind of struggled with transitioning from the uni lifestyle and how that worked for me and working in an office, because they're very different. And I think if you're neurodivergent, I think trying to cushion that transition will really help you. And working at that office in Clifford Chance before I started my training contract, it did really help, because it gave me experience in things like time recording, which is like a completely alien concept to anyone who's not a lawyer or a fee earner or works in the legal profession. Because I know that trainees that didn't have that experience before, they really struggle with that, and they just really struggle with kind of learning and working in an office in general. If they don't have that experience, it's a much more steeper learning curve for them. So I think get as much experience as you can, and also it'll just make your CV look really good as well.
Thank you. Laura, in terms of what you'd like to say from the college's side of things?
Yeah, I think the main message really to reiterate is, from a legal education perspective, let us know if you do have any sort of condition that requires adjustment, or if you're neurodivergent or whatever it might be. Let us know, get that dialogue going so that we can support you. I can see obviously there are maybe some concerns still about the employment sector and once you actually go into the workplace. But I think, from an education perspective, institutions will be very keen to support and to put those adjustments in place so that we're removing any disadvantage that you might have. So, yeah, open that dialogue with us.
Thank you. Phil?
Really sorry, I missed the question. Can you repeat that, please?
So, I mean, actually, there's a very specific question here for you. What tips do you have for people diagnosed with ADHD or autism working in the legal sector? So I guess it's about the advice that you'd like to give, if there's one or two things you'd like them to remember and take away from today.
Yeah, I found that the best employers are the ones that are able to give you that space and that safety to ask as many questions as you need, knowing full well that you're asking them to get clarity, and knowing that, you know, you're asking them because, you know, you're interested, you want to, you know, you want to train, you want to develop well, you want to be better, really. Yeah, and another one for me would be, yeah, forgive yourself for like not feeling like you're able to meet what are quite often expectations that are set out by neurotypical people who maybe don't necessarily fully understand your experiences, and say those expectations are maybe a bit high for you at the moment. So yeah, and it's again, you know, you can't know what you don't know, and you know, as time goes on, you do evolve, you do get better, you do develop. So it is a case of, you know, giving yourself time, giving yourself that patience as well. I would also say as well that there are plenty of ways to make the best career in the profession for you, whether that's to do with qualification route or the size of the employer, the location, practice area, you name it. Or even if, you know, qualification isn't for you. I mean, there are plenty of people who make a career out of being a paralegal, and, you know, they deserve so much credit for, you know, all the work they put in to support their firm and to support senior lawyers as well. Or maybe there's legal tech, or maybe there's HR, where you'd be able to use, say, some employment law knowledge. You know, possibilities are endless there. So, you know, don't feel like you have to follow the same path as everybody else. Your journey is your own, your timeline is your own. And, you know, we've got a career that's about 40, 45 years or so. So there's time for you to work out what works for you. So yeah, try new things, branch out, and let your career squiggle a little bit. And, you know, for any obstacles that you do come up against as well, you know, don't let failures, or don't let struggles to navigate things that aren't meant for you, like qualification routes or standards that are set for you, things like that. Don't let that deter you from doing what you want to do to achieve what you want to achieve in your career and in your life, doing the best work that you want to do that makes you happy and fulfilled, and, you know, just being the best version of yourself, really. And there's a saying that I do love, actually, and that's, everybody fails at who they're supposed to be, but the measure of a person is how well they succeed at being who they are. You know, you can't be anybody else. You can only be you, really. And you're more unique and more interesting than you probably give yourself credit for. So use all the years ahead of you that you have, all the resources that are at your disposal, and everybody in your circle, everybody in your community, to find out who you are, what you can do, and roll with it, you know, and go and be what you believe is the best version of yourself.
Thank you. Ibrahim.
Jill, can you be my therapist after this? But everything Phil said, the only thing that I would add is, if you're someone with ADHD, where it can be a bit disruptive, again, just allow yourself the time to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And the main thing I would say is, even though, for example, for a lot of us, our diagnosis is very recent, the discourse of neurodiversity, again, is a concept that we think is evolving very recently. It's existed for for God knows how long, right? So there have been undiagnosed barristers and solicitors that are doing phenomenally well in their job, and they've existed before we were even born, probably. And so, even though, for example, having clarity and getting medication and having adjustments is one thing, take comfort in knowing that there are so many before us who have still thrived in their own regards without getting a diagnosis. So I think just remember that part, is there are so many different types of lawyers, those who have ADHD and those who are diagnosed, and they are absolutely thriving.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for talking so honestly about your experiences and sharing so much openly with us. There are a whole host of kind of people that we will send you all, and links after this webinar with the recording. People who are quite inspirational as neurodiverse legal professionals from lots of different parts of practice, and then also beyond the legal sector. So we will make sure we share all those over. There are definitely some groups specifically to the legal sector that we would all say follow, get involved with if you wish. There's the Neurodiverse Lawyer Project, lots and lots of templates for reasonable adjustments and letters and things like that on there. Connie's involved with them. There's also neurodiversity in business and neurodiversity in law, and you can find them all on LinkedIn and most of them on Instagram as well. There's also Neurodiversity Celebration Week in about a month and a half, which hopefully always generates lots of resources. You always have to have some kind of awareness time to generate all the resources and interest, but it really ups, I guess, the level of stories and things. So there's also the Disabled Solicitor Network at the Law Society. For firms, I think the best guidance probably is from the SRA, actually, and they do have some best practice around reasonable adjustments and also some easy wins for disability inclusion in the workplace. So I guess the SRA and the Law Society are the best place to go for those, but we will pop those in the detail along with the link to Access to Work that Phil referenced as well. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone attending. If I haven't specifically asked your question, I hope that we have covered it across the course of the hour or so. We hope that you'll stay in touch, because the college will aim to keep shining a light on experiences of different types of individuals who are succeeding in the legal sector, who are coming with different challenges and different strengths as well, and perhaps from non-traditional routes. So that's something that we'll always try and do. And thank you for joining us. So yeah, thank you all.